Good morning. We're here to start one of our first budget committee sessions with a lot of meat in it, which is the department by department presentation of the details of the mayor's budget. So that's exciting. We have a number of them that will go today. We tried to put this in the order of which people showed a lot of interest. So I'd say the most exciting ones first, since we have the chief here with us. We have with us here on the dais council members Cunningham, Johnson, Ellison, and Schrader, with I'm sure others coming shortly. I did want to just take a moment to remind people, and as my colleagues are comfortable, that we can utilize these early meetings in a little different way. In the past, this is something that the vice chair, Councilmember Fletcher, and I worked a lot on with the budget office. So we'd like to use these meetings as one means to identify points of the budget that we'd like to talk about because there's specific interest in potentially changing or making some modifications or just lifting up. So now is definitely a great time to signify those ideas, and it provides the potential to work collaboratively with a couple of your colleagues that might also be interested in them well in advance of actual budget markup. So I will be keeping that list when people want to say that they want to flag something, and I will take it upon myself in my office to help start and make sure that those meetings happen with the right people in the department, to invite others that are interested in it, that express an interest to be involved in it. And I think that's just one way that we can help the actual budget process at the end of the year to be more knowable and just to be more forthcoming and better than it has been in the past. So with that, we're going to start with Chief Medaria Arredondo's presentation. We do have a break for lunch that is scheduled for an hour. It will probably end up being more than that because I'm not sure that we will end up taking the full time with the first two this morning. So just wanted to help people plan for that. Welcome, Chief.
Good morning. Chair Palmisano, committee members, good morning. Thank you for having myself and Director McPherson from our finance department here. So thank you all very much. Chair Palmisano, I don't know how to take your comment about me being the most popular, being that I'm the only one here representing. But nonetheless, happy here to address our Minneapolis Police Department's 2019 budget. So with that, wanted to provide a snapshot overview of our department organization chart. And I think oftentimes this gets overlooked, but I think it's very important. As I have been in my role as chief, I really wanted to make sure that the organization in the org chart reflected the core values of the Minneapolis Police Department, that being trust, accountability, and professional service. If you will look at some of the things that I really wanted to uplift and really highlight are under the Deputy Chief of Staff. We have our health and wellness, which is very important. For so long, we have talked about the trauma that our community experiences and how that has an impact on the role of us as peace officers. But we have never really been very intentional about the wellness for our own peace officers and how that's so important to make sure that the folks that serve as Minneapolis peace officers, that when they're interacting with our community, that they're as healthy and well as that they can be. Also proud to talk about our homeless and vulnerable populations initiative led by Sergeant Grant Snyder. We knew that for too long in our communities, our homeless and vulnerable populations have been invisible, which is a very sad statement. We know that the police department interacts on a daily basis with those community members of ours, and it was important for me at that time to really do what I could in our space to have someone kind of overlooking that effort. I would not have projected what has recently occurred in our city involving the encampment over off of Hiawatha, but we will continue to work as a city enterprise to support the efforts from the city over there. And I think all of our council members here who are also supporting what we can do best for our community members there. We also see that our procedural justice, our community engagement teams, and also we have EIS is also under that. And then, of course, all of you know of your individual precincts in your wards and our investigations. Some of the successes that I certainly wanted to note this year is, we're really making sure that data is driving our work, and that's very important because the data does tell the story. Our BWC compliance, and that was very important for us as well. I know that when we had started out, we weren't where we needed to be, and I think we were showing at about a 20% compliance rate through the efforts of our council members and certainly with our technology and in our policy changes, quite frankly. We have gotten that up, and we still have some room for improvement, but as we have looked at recently, an 80% compliance, that's very important, and we'll continue those efforts. Also under that is our co-responder model. So our officers going out there, interacting and engaging with members of our community who may be suffering from crisis, and is working along with our professional health providers, that has been very helpful as well, and that's a part of what's reflected here. And I would also say to our GIT and GVI teams, we had a very violent weekend last weekend, but I want to say that our overall violent crime is down, and I have to pay a lot of credit to the work of our GVI teams who've been doing a great deal of work messaging to members of some of our groups out here in the city that are causing some of that and trying to steer them in the right direction. Just a few challenges. As I mentioned, data drives our work and technology. That also requires human capital to oversee that data and technology. We've seen that with the BWCs and having to review that. And we also want to continue to make sure that we have personnel in places with investigations, particularly as it relates to domestic and sexual assault investigations. That's going to be very important moving forward. So that is a snapshot of our org chart. Next slide.
Chief,
Yes.
Just a quick question. The health and wellness piece that sits right under you,
Yes.
is that a way that this organization has changed in the past year since you've become chief? Could you tell me where that health and wellness position has been in the past?
Yeah. Chair Palmisano and committee members, yes, that has changed, and that is a cultural change in our department. Previously, and I think over the years, when members of our department have been suffering or needed health and wellness resources, they certainly had some of the opportunities that many other city employees would utilize, like EAP, Employment Assistance Program, but we never, it was never really based in terms of having qualified folks to really help us in such, for example, 5th Precinct over the past year has offered yoga and mindfulness training. We have seen some significant positive results in that. Having space and the ability for officers to name if they're experiencing issues and to do that in a safe place. But we had never even placed it in terms of our org chart like that. So that is new for us. Yes.
Thanks.
Yes. Right now I'll have Director McPherson talk about or speak to our over-the-year changes.
And just as you transition and do, I did want to point out to my colleagues, some who've just joined us, that we are using speaker management. It'll just be a way, when you put yourself in queue, I will find the next available opportunity to interrupt the speaker and give you the floor. So we are using speaker management today. Thanks, Ms. McPherson.
Committee Chair, council members. Most of the presentation is of course focused on the change requests that we've asked for next year, but I did want to spend a couple of minutes looking at the current service levels and what happens next year with those current service levels from a financial standpoint. If you take the 2018 budget and you decrease it by the one-time funding that occurred during 2018 and look at this number before the 2019 change requests, our budget increased year over year from 2018 to 2019 by 3.9%. That's made up of 3 specific items. The first one, there is a 3.3% increase over our base salaries, and again, that is all base salaries. The second increase is a 5.2% increase, which is $1.9 million in benefits. This is primarily due to pension and healthcare costs. And the third item is a 1.2% increase in internal service charges. That's approximately, so 1.2%, approximately $1.2 million. And that's primarily in fleet costs, actually offset by some savings in IT. So that's the makeup of the increase from 3.9 to 3.9%. Do you have any questions just specific to that?
I don't think so. I will interject that this is the first of these department by department presentations. And so something that Councilmember Fletcher and I are also trying to incorporate strongly into all of these presentations are results Minneapolis kinds of data, because the police department wasn't actually scheduled to do theirs until October sometime, and yet they're the first presentation. That is why we're not going to be able to, like we do with every other department, have the results part first. So that's why I think Ms. McPherson is just trying to kind of summarize the generalities of where they are at.
That's correct. I think our presentation is October 22nd. So we are still working. We are one of the departments that are using the new process for results, which puts us out a little ways. So thank you for.
And so the reason that the last Minneapolis results Minneapolis that you will see is 2 years away is because you offered and volunteered to be part of this first transition. Thus, you were kind of last year was not asked of you. So, yep.
Okay. Thank you.
I don't see any questions. Thanks.
So, Chair Palmisano, committee members, this next slide looks at our civilianizing existing sworn positions. The numbers you see here reflect funding for 8 personnel plus 3 vehicles, and that's 2019 that you see there, the 1108. That funding for 8 personnel plus 3 vehicles, since those officers, those sworn, will then be transferred back out to precincts or investigations. And the 929 is for the remaining years, which also includes a $20,000 annual in terms of fleet costs. It's important to note that this does not increase our sworn staffing, but puts them in law enforcement positions. So where those current sworn 8 are now, in those positions where the civilians would take those positions, we would reassign those sworn positions either to patrol or investigations. This does increase the staffing, civilian staffing, as they replace the now vacant positions when sworn personnel are moved out. Where we are looking at those 8 civilian positions, we're looking at 1 FTE in our crime lab quality assurance administrator, 2 for our crime lab computer scientists, 1 FTE for our body-worn camera computer technician, 1 FTE for our technology coordinator. We have 1 that was assigned just recently, FTE, to our LGBT liaison under our community engagement team, and then 2 FTEs for our backgrounds and support. We have a year-to-date attrition of about 30, and we estimate that to be about 42 by year's end. What's important about this slide as we talk about civilianizing within the MPD, for many years, we have placed sworn people in positions that civilians should have done. However, back in 2001, our civilian staffing was about 21% of the total MPD. Now that is down to 15%. That change is due to staffing reductions in the early 2000s, which disproportionately impacted our civilian complement, which means we'd also need to hire about 64 more civilian positions to get to those past levels. Similar-sized peer agencies employ on average about 24% of civilian complement to their staff. We are at 15%. And again, the reason for the sworn that we have in those positions now was due to that decrease that we experienced starting back in the 2000s in the past practice. So,
thank you. We have a number of people with questions or comments. The first is Councilmember Fletcher, followed by Cunningham and Bender, I think. Yep.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano, and thank you, Chief. So one of the advantages of creating some civilian positions is not just the ones that are, kind of listed here around cost efficiencies and some of the other efficiencies, but that there is an opportunity to have people with some real specializations and some real skill sets that they're trained up for that are different from what sworn officers are trained for. And it feels like there's a real need for that. And I guess One of the things that I'm wondering about is as we move to a data-driven model, I'm almost wondering if we have enough civilian support for that kind of data analysis and for the kind of process analysis to make sure that we're making good use of the data that we have and putting systems in place to make sure that we're actually responding and assigning our investigative resources appropriately based on things that are coming in. You and I have talked about a couple of instances where it felt like there was a need for process improvements. So I guess I'm wondering who's currently doing that work. Are there sworn officers in some of those data analysis roles or in some of those sort of process management roles? Have we looked enough at some of the opportunities to bring in civilian expertise that can help operationally for things to run better so that we're assigning our police resources to the right places?
Yeah. Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Fletcher, you're absolutely correct. So one, historically, we have not really looked at, and these current 8 positions are certainly not reflective on more of a deeper dive that we need to do in terms of the overall organization. I do believe that there are positions that we still need to look for in the department, and even some more creative ones where I believe our civilians could be doing those positions. Data is going to be very key as we move forward in terms of making sure, and I'll just say this, there's some great technology and data that's going to be coming out, and one that I'm going to be working with some national policing partners. It talks about how if we do it right, we can look at even some of the impacts in which housing, education, how that leads us into policing into certain areas, and give us a real timely sense of what we're doing right, what we're not doing so right. I think we need to do a deeper dive, and we haven't quite done that yet. Community navigators are a civilianized piece of that, but I also think if we look at our, business technology unit, I think there's some other creative ways to do that, and I have to do more of that deeper dive. But yeah, I think that there's certainly more of a need for that, and as police departments tend to go more with technology and data, we're going to need some more civilian experts to take on those roles. So I'd absolutely continue those conversations, be interested myself in looking at our organizational structure and seeing where we can have a good complement of civilians doing these technology and data-driven work moving forward. So, thank you.
Councilmember Cunningham?
Thank you, Madam Chair. That was actually going to be my first question was from your estimation, do you have an idea about like how many more positions could be civilianized? I was just curious if you have like a ballpark estimate.
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Cunningham, I don't have a ballpark exercise, and I say only because, again, going back to the 2000s, we had become, as a culture, just place a sworn in there. And so I'm sure there's more than just the 8 that are mentioned here. Yeah. Director, do you have an idea of the overview of? Yes, absolutely.
Committee Chair Palmisano, Councilmember. We don't have an exact number, but we definitely do have more. We've done a few over the last couple of years, and we're trying to do more and more. We are evaluating it. I think there's 2 questions here. One is, what can be civilianized? And then the second question is, we are understaffed with civilians. And so both those need to be addressed. And again, the technology, it's wonderful to get this new technology, our new RMS system and things like that. And a lot of times people, I think, have a false sense that that's going to reduce staffing, but instead we have more and more data, better information, but we need to be able to access that information. So in some cases, and I'll talk specifically about the intelligence side of things, we have both sworn and civilian right now. And the question is, what's the right mix? Because there is some benefit to having sworn in some of those positions. But again, the question is, where is the line? And that's something that we really need to be looking at on a case-by-case basis, which we do plan to do over the next couple of years.
Great, thank you for that. I just want to share as well that I had the fortune of meeting the LGBT liaison, who is the civilian in this position. He came to my community office hours to be able to connect with me and the folks who were there. Amazing folks, really were drawn to him, and I think in ways that folks maybe would have been a little bit more apprehensive had they seen somebody in a uniform. And so seeing that polo with the, that really made him far more approachable. The last question that I have for now is how can we be reassured that the sworn officers that are being moved out of these positions back into the community, that those are not officers that were pushed on desk duty because of the fact that they have behavioral problems?
Chair Palmisano to Councilmember Cunningham. So one of the things that we look at for any officer is if they have if they're going through sort of any disciplinary action or what have you, we want to make sure that those officers are in good standing not only with the department, but that as they go back out to the precincts, for example, that they have good supervision that is monitoring that. And I am not someone who wants to transfer problems. We want to address them, to deal with them. And so if there are the folks that are currently in some of these positions, it's not based upon disciplinary reasons, but we always want to make sure that every person who wears this uniform, no matter what assignment they are, that they're doing the right thing, are in good standing. And so there are times when an employee is going through where it's pending, the investigation is ongoing, where we may reassign them from non-enforcement duty. But again, regardless of the outcome of that, we want to make sure they're in good standing and make sure that they have everything that they need to go out there and serve our community in the manner that they should. So,
Thank you, Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief, could you repeat the positions that are included?
yes, Chair Palmisano to Council President Bender. Those 8 positions, those 8 FTEs, there'd be 1 FTE assigned to the Crime Lab Quality Assurance Administrator. There would be 2 FTEs assigned as Crime Lab Computer Scientists. There would be 1 FTE assigned as the Body-Worn Camera Computer Technician. 1 FTE assigned as a Technology Coordinator. 1 current FTE LGBT Liaison. And 2 FTEs in our background support.
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. I did have a couple of other questions. I think I don't doubt that we've talked for a number of years since I've been on the council about this, the fact that we have a lower count of civilian FTEs in our department compared to similar departments. So I think the idea that we would add more civilians in these roles makes sense. I do want to note, though, that we are moving officers onto the streets. So we are, in effect, adding 8 more officers to the streets in Minneapolis. And in the past, we have been, again, in the last few years since I've been on the council, really working to diversify the force that is on the street, and doing that by hiring out of our community service officer classes and using other techniques to hire a more diverse force. And so one question and concern I have is if we're moving toward this idea that we would be using our existing sworn officer pool as the new officers that we're putting onto the street, the 8 new officers, that we would be making less progress on those diversification goals. Can you speak to that?
Chair Palmisano to Council President Bender. So for context, so the 8 officers, the 8 sworn positions, they're within our existing numbers. So it's not necessarily 8 new hires, but ones that are currently there. We want to, and I want to continue to utilize hiring new officers from both our community service officers, as well as we see some diversity, some positive diversity numbers from our cadet program that is not the traditional recruit route. So definitely want to continue to utilize our CSOs and also utilize our cadet program to increase the diversity. And I'm not sure if I answered with the 8.
That's helpful. So
Okay.
You're saying as we replace officers through attrition and other ways that we're still continuing on that path of diversifying through hiring practices?
Chair Palmisano to Council President Bender, absolutely, yes.
And then my other question about this, or just, I guess it's more of a comment, and feel free to speak to it if you'd like. I also don't want to lose sight of the core value that we have been focused on for the past number of years, which is reforming, or whatever word you want to use, evolving how we are as a city and how MPD is interacting with the public. And that's why I was so supportive last year of having community liaisons and having more civilians be interacting with the public on behalf of the department, and not always having sworn officers be that face of our department. So I just don't want to lose that value as we're talking about ways that we can continue to add staff to the department. Last year we cut in half the number of proposed officers, or sorry, not officers, community liaisons, from 8 to 4, I believe. And I didn't see that come back through the additional 4 this year. I wondered what happened to the idea of having more community liaisons, or did I miss it in the budget?
Chair Palmisano to Council President Bender. So to your first point, I absolutely want to take as much opportunity to, we have a wonderful civilian complement of personnel. And whether it's through our crime prevention specialists, whether it's through our 311 folks, I mean, we have, and they need to be, they're part of our community. And I think they do a wonderful job as ambassadors for the MPD. And so I want to continue to find spaces that folks are out there in our communities, our civilian team members are representing us. So we'll continue to do that because they do play a vital and important role. The community navigator positions, yes, those were reduced down to 4. I would say, however, we are very fortunate that we will add on 2 more through a grant, and the 2 additional community navigators will both be LGBT liaison as well as intimate partner violence navigator. I would always accept more, and I think that they'll play a vital role. And so I'll continue to have conversations with all of our council members in that. That is certainly something that community has also expressed to me they would like to see, and there's certainly a need there. So as the conversation went before, is how can I do a deeper dive in terms of other parts of the organization where we can look at where civilian team members are needed. I'll certainly do that with the community navigators and other positions as well. So,
Are there any other questions? Nope. Thank you.
Next slide, I believe. Oh, right there. Okay. So, as a police department, when we have our trainings, they're held over at the Hennepin County Technical College. And one of the changes that we saw that has impacted our budget is that Hennepin County Technical College has increased that demand for instruction to $100,000 more. So in 2017, the cost for a cadet going through that training was $5,500 roughly. 2018, with the changes that Hennepin County Technical College increased, that went up to well, again, that increased that number now for per cadet to almost $8,000. Part of that was based on the decision by the Minnesota Post Board that they wanted to see increased learning modules, and that we could no longer, as an organization, we'd used to send our training instructors out there to do training on our behalf in terms of use of force and some of the handgun proficiency training. Post Board has said now that that has to be centralized and that only Hennepin County Technical College can provide that, which also extended the amount of time out there from 16 weeks to 22 weeks. And we are not just the only agency that has been impacted by that. That is any police agency that wants to send their folks through that training. That $100,000 increase impacts all of them. So with that, that is where we have seen, we will see the increase of that. So any questions on that? Comments?
Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair. So I think I'm less concerned about the budgetary impact, although, you know, obviously that's something to think about, but I'm interested in this sort of mandate to have Hennepin County Technical College providing the use of force training and other trainings that I would wonder if we might want to have more input into the curriculum. Are you feeling constrained in terms of how we train people? Do you feel like the training is appropriate? Does it raise other concerns that this shift is happening where some of the trainings on some of the things that I think we've been critically debating and sort of wanting to have some input into what those trainings look like be shifted away from things that you're able to command?
Chair Palmisano to Councilmember Fletcher. So exactly to your point. So there's a set of standard training modules that the Academy will do. The benefit that we have within our agency here is that once our cadets or recruits come back to us, we can provide them and provide for them specialized training specifically to us. So if we want to have training that's focused specifically on CIT or a co-responder specific to Minneapolis, we can have that. If we want to have Sergeant Grant Snyder conduct training on interaction with our homeless and vulnerable populations, we can do that. From a state level, I will say that one of the things or added training modules that the Post Board added was implicit bias training. And I will say that I'd like to say that they probably took that from our department, procedural justice, and they've also some CIT training as well. But I agree with you that we want to be mindful that the training that our cadets and recruits, anyone who's employed with us get, that it's real specific to us as Minneapolis. And so at this point, I don't see so much hampered by that. We can still tailor some specific training to our employees. Yeah.
Just as a quick follow-up, particularly on use of force, there's obviously a range of use of force trainings, ranging from trainings that would really emphasize de-escalation and use of force avoidance to trainings that are really it only takes a second sort of get everybody reaching for their guns as quickly as possible kinds of trainings, right? And we've seen nationally just a big variation in how we do that. Are you comfortable with the Hennepin County curriculum? Is that something that you feel is appropriate to the Minneapolis police force at this point?
Chair Palmisano to Councilmember Fletcher. I do at this point. And one of the things that I do have is I have our training folks go out there and look at that curriculum. If there's any sort of issues or concerns, I have the opportunity to bring that up with the training staff out at Hennepin County Technical. But I absolutely need to make sure that whatever training, even though it's more of a generalized 30,000 foot view, I have to make sure that that doesn't in any way conflict with our department, making sure that we're doing all we can to build those trusting relationships with our community. And specifically, of all of the things that we, and rightfully so, will be judged by our community, it's that use of force. And so that's going to be very important. And then de-escalation is key. I mean, we talk about sanctity of life in our organization. De-escalation is key to that. So, and we'll continue to monitor that. Yeah.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano and Chief Arredondo. I'm really, I share some of the same concerns that Councilmember Fletcher expressed. We're paying more and losing autonomy. But, you know, I think you addressed that fairly well, but it sounds like we're increasing by $100,000. So what is the current tuition or training fees that we pay? And then I have another follow-up question about the previous discussion about the civilian addition. So if you want to answer that question first, and then I can ask the second question.
Chair Palmisano to Council Vice President Jenkins. Previously, we were paying $5,584 per cadet. Mm-hmm. With Hennepin County Technical College's mandated increase of $100,000, that increased our cost now per cadet to almost $8,000. And so, again, that was something that through Post Board mandating that training, that we could no longer send our trainers out there to conduct that training, and that it extended that training from 16 weeks to 22. That's where we're absorbing those costs. Chair Palmisano, Council Vice President Jenkins. Not any better news in terms of the funding here, but for 2019, it's going to go up to about $10,000 per cadet.
Wow.
So, yeah.
And yeah, we lose that autonomy of being able to really I mean, because we're still going to need to do that specialized training when they come back to the department. I'm wondering about the addition of civilians that frees up sworn officers to be able to go back out on the streets. Will that help reduce response times, and what is the average and/or acceptable response times that you are currently working with now?
Chair Palmisano to Council Vice President Jenkins. So one, at least with this budget, with the 8 FTEs that we're talking about, those 8 civilians, I'm looking at placing those 8 sworn into a mixture of patrol and investigations. And I can pretty much say that for the investigations, sexual assault and domestic assault is a priority for us to boost those investigative teams up. As far as response time, fire department, they have kind of a national standard of what that looks like. For policing, it varies, and a lot of times it varies based upon call volume, but also because we prioritize our calls a little bit differently. I monitor those. Matter of fact, through Director McPherson, we track monthly what those response call times are, and I know that all of our council members also are concerned and get information about that. And so we want to do our best as we're responding to those priority 1s and priority 2 calls. And so service levels as to how precincts are staffed, I look into all of that as we're looking at every year. After we, if we lose folks through attrition, when our inspectors are looking at how do we look at our numbers now for the precinct, we look at all of that. I think it's important also to work closely with our MECC partners to look at different times of day when volume calls are higher. That helps our precinct inspectors in terms of their staffing appropriately for those. But those are things we continue to look at. There's just no set time. Different police jurisdictions in terms of their city, it varies. It really varies. But priority 1 calls are those ones where I'm sure all of you as council members here, when that community member picks up the phone and says, I need a police response right now, 5 minutes can seem like an eternity depending upon what the call is. And so I just want to always be mindful of making sure that we have enough resources to get to those important priority 1 calls when folks call us. So
will the data that you guys are going to be gathering, will that help determine like an average time or?
Chair Palmisano to Council Vice President Jenkins, absolutely. And we do those monthly breakdowns. We do look at per precinct and across citywide, which precincts are averaging the amount of time, whether it's 2 minutes and 36 seconds for priority 1s compared to this. So we look at that absolutely to determine what that data tells us in terms of what we need to do to increase our efficiency in reporting faster to some of those calls. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you. Just want to follow up on your point of the increase in time that the training's happening, the increase in cost, the increase in focus on what Hennepin County will be doing. And you mentioned that we're not the only jurisdiction affected. I wanted to see if there's something that was driving this in other jurisdictions. Is this part of what we're doing? Just kind of wanted to get a little more background.
Chair Palmisano to Councilmember Schrader. It's a good question. I'm sure over years that fee has gone up a bit. Post-board mandated that there'd be increased curriculum focusing on, I believe, again, implicit bias, CIT training. There's another thing in terms of proximity where we sent, because Minneapolis PD, we do not have our own academy per se where we run our own. We look at proximity in terms of where our students, where our recruits can go to. Hennepin County Technical College is probably, in terms of proximity, the easiest for us. There's other academies based much further away, and then we have to account for what that would look like too. We're kind of right now kind of beholden because they're the ones that are really kind of guiding this statewide training, and so.
Thanks. That helps. But I think my question I was really going to more: is there some change in training? Like this is really coming down from the Board of Peace Officers in Minnesota. For Minnesota, I didn't want to see if there's a bigger issue we should be aware of.
Chair Palmisano to Councilmember Schrader. So yeah, I think probably one of the keys is now, because it's gone from 16 to 22 weeks, that added curriculum by post, they just changed that last year. So I think that is a key driver too. The longer that they have peace recruits there, the costs are going to, with instructors and everything else, that's going to add. So I think when post changed their curriculum, which obviously the state agencies had to comply with, I think that's a part of why we see those trainings or those increase in funding there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. I want to pick up on Council Vice President Jenkins' question around current level of service and response times. And one of the things that was notable to me on my last ride along is we went on some very important calls, and we went on some calls that it actually seemed like were probably not calls that should have been made to MPD in the first place, but where else are you going to dispatch them, right? If they come in, they come in. And so I guess a part of my question is, one of the ways that we can support, one answer to supporting MPD in having faster response times would be increased staffing. One answer would be, are there functions that shouldn't be on your plate that we can take off of your plate so that you can respond most effectively to the things that we most need you to respond to? And so I guess I'm wondering, what thought are you putting into, or have you thought of, are there particular areas of calls that you're seeing or particular areas of responses that MPD is being asked to give that if you really stop and think about it, you go, gosh, regulatory services really ought to be doing that, or whoever else. Are there things that we can help take off your plate so that your officers aren't running from call to call quite as much and aren't spread quite so thin?
Chair Palmisano to Councilmember Fletcher, that's a great question, and we've had some discussions about this, and so the answer is yes. There are absolutely calls that folks are getting dispatched to day and night that we are not the appropriate response for that. I know she's not currently here now, but I was going to say that at some point in time, Assistant Director McPherson from MECC would want to get down and have a conversation with her about the CAD layouts and the different calls for service, and really see if there's a lot of it has just been because we've always been the ones to respond to it. And I think we can do a better job of that. I also think that it's a benefit for our communities. If there's another response, it's more appropriate for that as well. Folks and we talked about the response times. If it's a call that did not require police response, and then again it is prioritized to a priority 3, and the officers show up 30 minutes later, and now community's upset. If we could have had another response, it could have got there more faster, more appropriate. So I absolutely think that there's an opportunity for certainly for me to look at and work with our MECC to see if we can't do a deeper dive into that and eliminating some of those calls that we aren't the most appropriate response to go to. So yes. Yeah. Okay. As I had mentioned earlier in terms of our org chart, the importance of health and wellness training for our employees. We are looking at, and this is the first time, and I want to thank the council for being in support of the health and wellness of our employees. This would be a program that would be multi-pronged, would focus on both mental health, mindfulness training, physical and nutritional awareness, but it will also integrate our early intervention system efforts with an overlap with mentoring and counseling efforts. These funds would be spent on consultants for training and to evaluate our needs, and develop programs that are significant to the increase of our health and wellness for our staff. We have seen significant increase in workers' comp budget over the last few years, and that one of those figures is $1.9 million from just a few years ago. While we know that sick time is a benefit for all of our city enterprise employees, it certainly can have a significant impact on overtime due to the need in the Minneapolis Police Department to backfill those positions. If a third of sick time was needed to be filled, the overtime cost would be approximately $1.5 million for the Minneapolis Police Department. Again, sick time is a benefit for all our employees, but we have not done the best job we can in terms of addressing our health and wellness of our employees. And so this funding here for health and wellness, I think, will be an important way for us to move forward. And when we talk about those relationships with our community and that they're suffering from trauma, the fact that we are able to name now for the first time that our employees need to have their health and wellness supported, I think that this is an important piece to that. So,
Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Chief, I just wanted to ask real quick, was this the $150,000, is this meant to be a one-time, or was the request originally for ongoing? Because I'm just not sure if it's like an investment so that we build the capacity within the department to be able to carry it out, or is this going to be something that we have to continuously come back and ask, or you have to keep coming back and ask for?
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Cunningham, I would be lying if I said I would not want this to be ongoing because of the importance and the nature of it. My understanding, I believe it was one-time funding. Councilmember Cunningham, one-time funding. Yes.
And so thank you for that. And I have talked quite extensively with the leadership at the 4th Precinct around specifically improving constituent satisfaction and policing service that's provided by the 4th Precinct, because I get quite a lot of feedback from community members that they're not particularly happy around the way that officers are interacting with community, whether they're victims or witnesses or whatever the case may be. When I talked to the leadership, one of the pieces of feedback that I got was essentially reflecting what is here, which is like there are some folks are coming in already amped up and they don't necessarily have the tools to be able to calm themselves down. So this is, I think, really, really crucial. And when we were looking, it mentions around data, the results in data. I just wanted to also suggest if this is something that ends up being supported by the council, that I would really recommend a data point that's around constituent satisfaction with policing service, because really where we are seeing this is when when the officers are showing up and they're dealing with an amped up person and they're already amped up from their last call because they didn't push reset in between and they weren't mindful and present, that changes the interaction. And so I think it's, if I may reflect, I think it's really important for us to start collecting data on that as well, like the perceptions of from the community of officers. This is a particular area that I really want to support as a council member, because I heard the 4th Precinct leadership when they said that this was something that was really needed. So, but I wanted to reflect that that was really where that conversation came from, was ultimately about constituent satisfaction and police service. So thank you.
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Cunningham, thank you for your comments on that. I would agree with you. That is very important. That is something that occurs daily in the work that officers are doing to respond. If they were dealing with a priority 1 call for a couple of hours and now they know that they have to respond to that priority 3 and they're an hour and 15 minutes late, the caller's a little bit unnerved, and so very important. I will say, in terms of the ability for officers to recalibrate and reset, is very important. I'll just a story about 5th Precinct had started their yoga and some mindfulness training over there, and as Inspector Waits tells the story, some of the veteran officers were just curmudgeoned and what do you mean, waterfalls over rocks, this isn't going to do anything. And about 2 months into it, now those veteran officers are bringing their own yoga mats. So yes, so it can
I've
work,
heard
and it's
that.
important. So
That's what I heard from the 4th Precinct leadership. They were like, I've definitely gone to about 3 or 4, because I was skeptical. I was like, is anybody even taking these yoga classes? And they kind of were like, I've been to about 3 or 4. So it is actually a big hit. Yes. So I'm excited to see that folks are open to this, because honestly, pushing that reset button, being able to be mindful in between the 2 interactions, is what ultimately is community police relations. So thank you.
And Chair Palmisano, to Councilmember Cunningham, I would just say that while this would be Rondo's unscientific data, I believe if you were to take a deeper dive in terms of perhaps some of the complaints of language and attitude that our OPCR receives, I I'd be willing to bet that some of that plays a role in that. Yeah. So. Our mobile data computers, the numbers that you see reflective here through from 2019 projected out to 2024. These MDCs, as they're known, are the primary device used for our non-voice data transmission. These are the technology computers that our officers use day and night to go ahead and transcribe the reports and make the reports. Our current fleet of MDCs dates back to 2010. We have been replacing them due to frequent breakdowns. For last year, we averaged approximately 45 breakdowns a month. When those breakdowns occur, they keep our squads from being used, greatly impacting our operations and productivity. This funding helps us to replace those needed, plus ongoing funding allows us to be on a replacement cycle so we can keep those squads fully functioning and operational. Currently, we have 110 old MDCs. We would be replacing those with Toughbooks, and I'm not a computer geek, but if any of you know what the Toughbooks are, they're really robust, sturdy. You can pop them out of the squad car. You can take them with you, that's what the new technology. It's better in terms of efficiency. They're also more reliable, better able to handle our PIM software, and better able to run multiple programs. We currently have 67 Toughbooks being used for our PIMS training. This plus the 18 from the 100,000 will go towards the old squads. Then we will do the rest over the next year and have half to follow that replacement cycle. The life expectancy is 7 years. The cost is about $5,500 for one of those, so that's where we get the $100,000 in there. We have about 200, so it will take us 11 years to replace all of them at the same price. And so that's what our MDC Toughbooks.
Thank you. We have a couple comments or questions. First from Councilmember Fletcher and then Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. Chief, we've talked about one of the critical mobile computing functions that we need being printers. And I'm wondering if there's anything we can do about that. I've had conversations with officers where they've indicated that sometimes they're not writing tickets for things that we would want them to be enforcing because they don't have mobile printers that they feel comfortable carrying. And I'm wondering if that's the technology doesn't exist or if it's something that we actually could, make an investment. I know it's very frustrating for some of my constituents when they see somebody, flagrantly parked in a place that they're not supposed to be parked, and they see an officer walk past that and do nothing about it. And the reason, of course, is that we're not allowing handwritten tickets anymore. And so if they don't have a mobile printing device, they're not able to do that. And I think that's a real gap that we've created by upgrading technology that needs to be addressed. So is this something that we've looked into? Is this something that there's potential for? I know I've indicated an appetite for trying to figure out a way to get it in the budget if the technology exists, and it's something we could do.
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Fletcher, you're absolutely right. The printers as well as the handheld ticket writers, it's an important piece. I know our officers have been asking for that. Not reflective in this, but I absolutely think that the potential is going to address that. Yes. Yeah.
Committee Chair Palmisano, council members, we do know the ticket writers need to be replaced. The old technology for the printers is poor at best. My opinion, non-tech opinion here. But we are, Lieutenant Rugel is now in charge of our BTU unit, and that's one of the things he's looking at in 2018. We don't have an answer on what that's going to look at. We are using, I think it's Reg Services, some of theirs as a trial basis. But we're going to be expanding that and looking at other options. So at this point, we don't know what we're going to go to, but we definitely know that we need to go to something different than what we have currently.
I'll just express a sense of urgency around this question. I think it's something I have constituents constantly, tweeting at me saying like, "Why is MPD not doing anything about this?" And I think, the fact that there's some practical barriers to us doing any kind of an enforcement program around, for example, parking in bike lanes, is something that I wouldn't want to have wait until, the 2019 budget cycle for 2020. If it's something that we can make some progress on, I'd like that. Thank you.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. Chief, I'm curious, I hear from officers that they leave their cars idling for hours at a time because it takes a long time for their computers to sort of boot up. These new tough books, will they eliminate that problem?
Chair Palmisano to Council Vice President Jenkins. So one, they shouldn't be idling for hours at a time. The tough books, because they're, and again, not being a technology person, but my understanding is because they're replaced, you can take them out, pop them up. It shouldn't require, unless I'm wrong, it shouldn't require them to be idling to get their cars to idle for a long time to boot up. I mean, you can pop those things right out and take them into the precincts, what have you. So.
Yeah, because I hear that I see the cars idling all the time, and I ask the question, and they say, well, their technology, they can't shut off the car because their technology then will not be active, and so.
Chair Palmisano to Council Vice President Jenkins, yeah, with these tough books, and I've actually used one before. I mean, you don't require idling to get it to boot up and what have you. So with these here, that should, if there's any talk or concern about that, that should help in that. So, yeah.
Very good.
I should point out, I think there's an idling ordinance in our city.
Yeah,
I think it's 2 or 3 minutes.
Chair Palmisano, I just wanted to, yes, say that shouldn't be idling. Yeah.
That's all the questions we have right now.
Next is our body camera interface along the same lines of technology. And I will say that this is one that through some very intentional conversations by Chair Palmisano, you, Councilmember Fletcher, and others as it relates to the BWCs, this will be very helpful. And as we talk about our compliance with body-worn cameras and our audits, this new technology will basically grab that video and grab that CCN, that case control number, and match them together. We saw that when our compliance numbers were very low, one factor had to do with this technology not being integrated. Just some of the numbers for Q2, there was over 153,000 videos, but there was no startup videos or training videos. There was at least almost 7,000 that were missing a case number. There's 700 that had an incorrect year, and there's a couple of other lists that go on and on. This body camera interface to our 911 CAD system would help increase that the efficiency and the compliance with our BWCs, and that's so important when we talk about the human capital that's needed to review all of those videos, and if there's a CCN that's not attached to it, this body camera interface would help that. So.
Thank you.
Again, along the same lines with body cameras, by the end of 2020, all MPD will have been issued body-worn cameras. We have currently right now 614 deployed. MPD officers are recording on average 1,900 videos per day. In June, cameras were activated along that 82% compliance number that I had mentioned. Next steps that we want to do with this important tool is have our dashboard development for supervisory and audit staff, continue to implement supervisor auditing program, and create this public dashboard for our BWCs. $60,000 one-time cost is due to the equipment purchase, and the $177,000 is ongoing storage and phone service costs. And so those are the numbers there for the body-worn cameras. And much of our conversation today has been on our responses to our community, and certainly our community in crisis. Our co-responder program has paid really important dividends in terms of our outreach to our communities and having a different response than one that was oftentimes uniformed officers responding to situations where they may not have had the most appropriate training. Our co-responder program teams up MPD officers with COPE, professional health service providers, and the ultimate goal is to keep those in crisis at home and not having to transport them to facilities out of their home. The program in its first 6 months resulted in over almost 1,500 people being able to remain in their homes. Our co-responder teams responded to 326 contacts, where 149 of those remained at home. 96 we did transport to hospitals or other care facilities. We had some where they were gone on arrival, those community members. We anticipate even more success with the completion of the new 1800 Chicago building. And COPE has submitted several grants, which would also help with costs in 2019. And I know that just recently they were awarded a significant grant. So I'm a firm believer in what COPE has done already, and this would expand it from 3rd and 5th precinct to the 1st precinct. This also provides for a unmarked vehicle for the COPE team.
Thank you. We have a few questions. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to, first I want to say that Inspector Wade has done a wonderful job leading this. When she came to show all the data and give me an update on it, it's just really great leadership. I have some concerns about the expansion not including the 4th precinct and in North Minneapolis. So I was just curious as to what the data was that drove this decision to not, because now we only don't have it in the 2nd and the 4th precinct. So I was just curious the logic as to why not extending that to North Minneapolis.
Chair Palmisano to Councilmember Cunningham. I agree with you. There is a need for COPE or co-responder in North Minneapolis. I think the rationale behind the 1st precinct had to do in part with the volume of calls. We do know that we have a lot of our community that are utilizing some services in downtown Minneapolis, or that they're closer to those services in downtown Minneapolis, whether it's those of our community members who are experiencing homelessness or those who feel the need to stay close to, for example, HCMC in the event that they should suffer a crisis. We do see a significant call load of our officers in the 1st precinct responding to check on individuals in those communities. I do not have data specifically for the 4th precinct, but I will tell you that we have not always looked at those types of calls in the 4th precinct as we should. And I'll explain that in that many of the calls that come out from 1st precinct are titled just that, someone coping from a crisis or mental health condition. In the 4th precinct, those can come out as domestic. Those can come out as assaults or things, but there's a crisis that's actually in play. And so so part of that data, I think, is going to be skewed a bit because we have not looked at it in that sense. But I do believe there's absolutely a need for that. And so I'd certainly be open to having discussions about that and what that looks like. But I would agree with you on that.
Great, thanks. I think, and I mentioned this during our co-responder presentation that Inspector Waite did, that there's the one piece of the bias of interpreting somebody who is having an episode. There's the bias of how that's coded is one piece of it. But then the other piece of it is that particularly Black folks do not call the cops when there is a mental health crisis happening, because there is just the automatic fear of, well, they're going to use a gun to be able to calm me down, or, or calm that person down, or, they're going to end up getting in trouble when I'm trying to get help. And so I think that also plays into it. If one of the questions that I've gotten from folks is, like, how do we make sure that the county is paying their fair share of this program, given that it's really mental health intervention based? You mentioned that COPE got a large grant recently. So I guess I'm just curious, how from your perspective, how do we partner better with the county to make sure, like, if we want to, let's say, expand citywide, that we as the city don't have to absorb that burden, given that the county plays such a large role in mental health interventions?
Chair Palmisano to Councilmember Cunningham. So we certainly are having those conversations. I'm having conversations with Leah Kaiser over at the county. I think that they would tell you too there's a need probably citywide here in Minneapolis. I know that they're doing as much as they can in terms of trying to secure those grants, and I think it's again, I think it's very important that we do make sure that in terms of balance, that the city isn't taking on more than basically that we're leveraging our county's assistance and partnership in those fundings where we can. So I'll continue to have those conversations. I'll work closely. Director McPherson monitors those as well. So, and she certainly is a stickler for speaking up to making sure that we are getting the right funds that we should. So, yeah.
Council members Bender and then Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. My questions were actually specific to this question about the costs associated with the program and how much of it is going to the specially trained officers and their training and related expenses versus how much we're paying to the county for the COPE support. And I am very interested in expanding this program citywide as soon as we can. So I think part of the question is the breakdown in costs between the COPE support from the city's expenses versus the cost of our officer.
Sure. Committee Chair and Council Member or Council President. Right now, the police department is pretty much absorbing anything that's non-COPE. So this money, with the exception of the car, would go 100% to COPE. So $250,000 would go to COPE to pay for their people. Short term, we're hoping that the grants come through. We have not seen the budget for the grants, so we don't know how much was awarded that was, when you do a grant budget, you have to specify how you're spending the funds. And so we don't know how much of that is hopefully coming our way, which is something we have a call in to try to find that out, because this award just happened. Long term, though, I think there's a bigger question on what's sustainable and where is the division, because grants are only good for so long. And usually once the program is up and running, the grant goes away and you're expected to handle the program within your normal operating costs. So again, with the chief, with Inspector Waite and myself having conversations, this is a long-term issue that we need to determine how, once we're up and running as much as we possibly can, then what happens? And we don't have an answer for that at this point.
So can you remind me that our expenses related to officers that are involved in this program, are those all in ongoing funds now?
Yes. Okay. Yes, they are. And so we're also using 2 vehicles specifically for the 2 teams that are already up and running. So we've pushed those to that. We do have some training. We've sent the officers. They've actually been local, so the training has been relatively inexpensive, but we have sent them to some trainings to some other cities to see best practices, things like that. They have soft uniform costs, which we cover, which is not part of a standard uniform. So we are absorbing some costs. It's not a huge amount, with the exception of our squads, but they would be using those squads anyway. Ongoing costs, though.
So the total ongoing cost to the city of the officers portion is 2 sworn officers per precinct?
It's 2, no, it's 1 per team. So right now we have 2 officers who are doing this program, and with the 3rd in the 1st precinct, then we would have a 3rd officer assigned to that team.
Okay. So the minimal expense of the city of the officer portion, if we wanted to have just 1 officer per precinct, would be a total of 5 officers plus the soft costs. But then we would be looking to the county or other sources to fund the COPE, the mental health portion of the program.
That is correct.
But we have been covering that basically fully from the beginning of this pilot.
That's correct.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. So when Inspector Waite presented to the Public Safety Committee about this, it sounded like we would need to add an officer, and I don't see that reflected in this change item. So is that coming at, is that reflected in the 8 additional capacity that comes from the civilianizing positions? Is that how we get a position to work with the co-responder in the first precinct?
Yeah.
Committee Chair, Councilmember, yes, that would be one of the 8 so it would come out of our existing complement of officers. We did not ask for an additional FTE
Great.
to put that in.
And then if we're providing one officer per precinct for this, that means we're covering one shift. So what hours is this co-responder model available in the precincts that we're providing it?
Council Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Fletcher. So because we're also teaming up with our COPE, it's daytime hours. And so there's certainly a need, even in the evening hours, but it would model, at least right now, daytime hours. Yeah.
And in terms of that partnership with the co-responders, is it possible to scale it up to a 24-hour program? Because I know we certainly get EDP calls 24 hours a day.
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Fletcher, yeah, absolutely. There's a need for that. Scaling it up would require, obviously, instead of the one officer in the daytime, obviously adding it. So basically 2 officers per precinct. So yeah, it would have to bolster those numbers, 2 per precinct, yeah, as well as 2 COPE. Yeah.
If I may interject here, I asked a lot of questions about that to Inspector Waite when she came to present, and she did say that part of the decision to staff co-responders when we did in this pilot version of the program was both, it was the hours that the most voluminous a number of calls came in terms of all of their data on the disturbed calls that they received. It also was to coincide with the school day because they felt that this would best serve students to have something like this able to show up when necessary and to make that service available to the schools in our city. So that was, I know, part of the thought behind it. And I just wanted to point that out. Also, I wanted to mention to my colleagues that I know that Councilmember Cano did a lot of scoping of this with the police department in terms of what citywide mental health co-responder expansion would look like. And I believe she just sent that out to everybody here on the dais. So some of that additional legwork is here. Thanks.
Last slide here is the Fix It, Not Ticket program. We know that many in our communities, because of the necessity to have vehicles to get to and from work or take their kids to daycare, they may have repairs on their vehicles that require fixing, but adding additional sort of enforcement tickets to that only creates a more strain and stress on that community member. The voucher program will have a positive impact for some of our most vulnerable people, as they may have quicker access to needed repairs, avoiding multiple tickets, impounds, and possibly loss of jobs. This also improves street safety due to more functioning vehicles with lights, helps mitigate hardships of repairs, and builds goodwill with our community. And so we have already, this past year, had our officers with these tickets out and have gotten some really good feedback. It's been working well in different segments of our city. And so this $25,000 is a reflection of the Fix It, Not Ticket. And it's also been done in other jurisdictions across our region as well. So,
Councilmember Cunningham?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask real quick, Chief Rondo, about data that will be collected on this. Is there any sort of measurements that are in mind? Again, this is one-time dollars, so we might be back here next year and would just like to be able to have some data to be able to back up potentially another one-time investment.
okay. Chair Palmisano to Councilmember Cunningham. So we are tracking that right now. And so we'll continue to make sure we're tracking that data to give us again, tell us a story and see where the strengths are with this here program. So.
We have another comment or question from Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. I believe this was the last slide in the presentation. I just wanted to note that the way that the city funds public safety shows up partly in the police budget, but also through the health department and our violence prevention work that I know, Chief, you've been so supportive of and really a champion of our investments in group violence intervention and our Next Step program and our youth-based violence prevention work. I wanted to note that the collaborative safety strategy funding that we've been investing in for the last couple of years has not been proposed for renewal this year. And that may make sense. It was an initiative of the former mayor. But I do want to make sure that while we're continuing to invest millions of dollars in the police department every year, that we are continuing to also invest in a balanced approach to public safety that goes upstream and invests in violence prevention too. And so I'm very pleased to see that the GVI funds in this proposed budget are proposed to be ongoing funds. The Next Step are not. And I just want to note for my colleagues that those particular wards that had the collaborative safety strategies geographically based may have opinions about how effective those have been or not, or how we might work together as council to make sure that any work that has happened through those that's been beneficial continues either through the recast grant or a different kind of funding that's showing up in the budget somewhere in the city enterprise.
Thank you. Did you want to have anything that you wanted to share about that?
Chair Palmisano, to Council President Bender, I think that the work that GVI and Next Step, Ms. Connie and Mr. Farji's team, the teams over there, have truly saved lives. And as we look at so many of our young people who oftentimes have had to utilize those services, but have really walked away with support and resources. And I can't speak enough about GVI, particularly Next Step has done phenomenal work, and they'll continue to be a great ally and partner with certainly me and the police department. So, yeah.
Thank you. Councilmember Cunningham.
One last question. I wanted to see if it would be possible, as we're going into this budget time, to get some data on MPD's performance while we're taking that into consideration. Would it be possible to get data on the cases and cases solved for homicide, assault, robbery, as well as so that's the violent crime investigations, and then within Special Crimes Unit, data on domestic assault, crimes against children, and sex crimes, please. I also would I would like to see some data on the EIS. And if I could get some feedback or data or some narrative around the Police Athletics League and the SRO program as a part of the juvenile outreach work. Just curious about that so that we're able to tell the story about the work that's happening and be able to see how that's impacting our community. So a little bit of data would be really helpful. Thank you so much.
All right. Are there any other questions for Chief Arredondo at this point in time? All right. So as I mentioned before we started, one new way or device that Councilmember Fletcher and I have been speaking and working with finance on is the ability to take conversations that we have here during departmental, the first, deep dive into that department's budget, and to take them and to coordinate people around them and to give them an opportunity to start meeting with staff that might be needed for further conversation before well in advance of markup. So the one that I know that I've logged, because I've confirmed it right next to me, would be about mobile printers for officers. Other things that I heard, but aren't kind of formally in this queue, might be around the expansion of the co-responder program and or collaborative safety strategies. Is there energy around that? Do we want to formally take that offline and start a work group about it? I won't unless somebody wants to speak up and say so. All right, you can just tell me at the break or whatever. Also, we have about 10 minutes before the fire department goes, and I'm curious if people would like to move forward or take a 10-minute break here. Mr. Intermill, it looks like you want to say something.
Madam Chair, I do believe that the fire department's outside and ready to go if the council wants to proceed.
Okay, so the will of the people here? Continue on and end a little early. Chief, thank you so much for being here. I also wanted to recognize we do have the Chief Public Defender of Hennepin County Public Defender's Office here in the audience, Mary Moriarty, and a colleague. So thank you for caring and being part of some of the important things that we do in our police department. With that, we'll bring in the fire chief and get started with that. We'll give you just a minute to do the transition here.
Yes, I think yours is as well. If you see anything else of mine, let me know. Where did yours send me to?
All righty, looks like we're ready. Chief Friedel, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Again, I'm Chief Friedel. I'm proud to say I'm the chief of the Minneapolis Fire Department. I don't mind following Rondo, being number 2. That will change on Saturday during the Battle of Badges when I finally win that rib cook-off again. That will be number 1. So, thank you for the opportunity. The committee, Chairman Palmisano, I really appreciate the opportunity to come present the 2019 Mayor's recommended budget.
Thank you. And before we begin, would you like to introduce those that you've brought with you today, just in case people don't know faces
I would love to. I was going to do it during, but
Yeah.
I'll do it before. That's fine. To my right is my finance director, Luke Scardilli. We have Assistant Chief Tyner. We have Assistant Chief Cruz. I have my Deputy Chief of EMS, Amber Lage, and my interagency coordinator, Erica Prosser. I've got some of my other staff are here. They're working today. I'm probably can say we just started another class of recruits this morning at 8 o'clock, so they're busy with the class of recruits tomorrow. They aren't going to be able to join us.
Terrific. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I would just start out much like Chief Arredondo did with a quick overview of the department with our org chart. Obviously, we are a paramilitary organization. We have an operations, logistics, finance director, and we also have administrative assistant chief. Chief Cruz is my assistant chief of operations. And in that, he pretty much is in charge of all the day-to-day operations of the firefighters out in the districts. In other words, under him, there are 5 district chiefs there's deputy chief and 5 district chiefs that all work under him. He's pretty much in charge of all the day-to-day operations. So when we're all on the phone at late night and pagers going off, he's the first one that we talk to. We start talking right away about what's going on with the different events. Our logistic chief was not with us today. He pretty much takes care of all of our fire stations, all of our fire trucks. We've been able over the last few years to get our fleet back in line. When I first came back as chief, our fleet was a little bit in disarray. We had, obviously with some economic stresses that we had in the city, the fleet became a little bit, it was certainly getting used. And so we've been able to get that back on track and working with the folks in fleet and public works who've done a really good job of getting that back on track. Amber Lay's deputy chief of EMS, that's one area that I'll probably talk about a little more in one of my change requests. That is a very important element of what we do, because that's about 85% of what we do is EMS. And that's one of the changes I want to talk about briefly a little bit this morning about what we can do with that. And also down the line with Luke Scardilli is here, and you can see we have it's a small staff, it's a small department in terms of our organization. If you look around the country, other departments are much larger than we are in terms of staff. I work my staff very hard. They've done an absolute outstanding job with the work that they've done, and I'm very proud of the work that they have done over the last few years since I've been chief. Into our first change item we had for 2019. As I spoke about earlier, our growing percentage of our runs are certainly EMS. EMS probably commands about 80% of what we do today. And we're all very well aware of the challenges the healthcare system has in this country today. I think there are a lot of departments, I know we are for certainly here, and others in the metro area are looking at different ways that we can maybe change our role to try to minimize some of the costs that we incur during this system and our responses. I think that we've come up with a plan to be able to do that, to do a data project. And the planning kickoff of that will be first week of January. We've got the date set. Between now and then, we have a lot of work to do to allow us to be prepared to address some of those issues. In today's healthcare system, to be, maybe at this sort of, without getting into the weeds, today, many of the individuals that live or folks that live in this city, their only access to health care is by dialing 911. I think, and then that's a trip to the ER with a very expensive ambulance ride, with a real expensive fire truck going down the street. Maybe you've included a Minneapolis PD officer, depending on the type of incident. That's a lot of resources to put on a number of these runs. A number of the runs that we go on today don't require that type of response, at that level of response. And sometimes we're starting to think that this continuous into the ER system, back out, back into ER, because a lot of these folks will go home. That's their only access to health care. They get a little bit anxious. They may be fearful. They may be concerned about the medical condition they may have, and they go right back in the ER system. And we truly, I don't think, focus enough on defining really what type of medical care they really need to be able to and need to be defined for them. So overall, in the project going forward, we are going to identify a group, whether it be through some BLS work, which is basic life support work, and also doing a little bit of community EMT work, where truly the needs of the folks that they have medical needs can be defined, and we can assist with connect them to the appropriate health care. A role and scope of the role that we play in mobile integrated healthcare, I think, has to be truly defined. What we're talking about is something that is relatively new. It's innovative in the country. A lot of folks haven't gone to this level yet, but I think that our folks in the citizens of the city deserve us and deserve our best effort to improve efficiency. And the end outcome, at the end of the day, it's to improve the health care for the folks and outcomes for the folks who live in this city. There was an ask for five positions. We are going to start out with a beta study in collaboration and cooperation with Hennepin County Medical Center. That is going to start in January. We're going to be very focused on how this is going to be rolled out. We're going to start putting some data together early on so we can come back and report to committee to find out just where we're at, how this is going to work. I think it's going to be very efficient. I think it's going to be cost savings. We're not going to necessarily have to send a $500,000 fire truck down the street to a certain event. We can put the right vehicle on the right event and hopefully have the right outcome. So there is going to be some efficiency in the savings. I think it's an exciting opportunity for us. We have a lot of work to do between now and January. I started this discussion almost 6 years ago, and it's taken 6 years to get this point where it's just hard to move that rock sometimes. It is challenging, but especially when it comes into the healthcare world. But I think it's something we need to do. I think our present model, although it's very, very good, and working in collaboration with Hennepin County, I think our response model is very successful. I think we can become more efficient, and I think that our healthcare can improve. I think that we can do a better job of assisting our constituents and helping them truly get connected to the healthcare that they probably need. So our role will change in that mobile integrated healthcare and how that all that layered system works. Our role is going to change. We'll figure out where we're going to fit, and I think it's going to be successful. I really do think it is going to be successful.
If I could pause you there, we have a question or comment from Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano, and thank you, Chief. I just want to really commend you for pulling this together. I'm really excited about it. I know we're getting a little more detailed presentation on this mobile health proposal at the next public safety meeting. So if people are interested in going into more detail on this, I want to flag that we're continuing this conversation on it, and that Councilmember Cunningham and I are collaborating to do a small ordinance change to sort of open up the space for this. So in support of this good work, there's a lot of moving pieces to this. There are state funding and county funding implications. There's the practical logistics of it. There are labor implications. And I think you've done a very good job of navigating that. And I think this is an exciting vision. So excited to continue partnering with you on this. And thank you for getting this moving.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Schrader.
Sure, I just want to echo Councilmember Fletcher, and I'll definitely follow up on a little bit more interest in this, but I did have a question about, are we moving into an area that the county is currently the head of? I'm worried about us taking on responsibility and putting resources to something that another entity is in that space and should be responding to.
I would look at this, Chairman Palmisano, committee member Schrader, I look at this as a shared collaborative effort. Now, we have worked very closely with Hennepin County my entire career. As we first started, when I first came on the job, we were just first responders, little first aid patches on our uniforms. Now this has evolved, and it's evolved. Now we're all EMTs. This is the next step in that progression of involvement. As this whole medical piece starts to evolve, I think that it's important for us to maintain that collaborative effort with them. There will be hopefully something built in where the program itself will be sustainable. In other words, there will be some reimbursement back to us for the work that we do. And we will not be, right now, we're doing all of our EMS events. Those are all for free. We're not getting anything back. So I think it's a real strong collaborative effort, and I think it's important that we maintain that. In some of the work that we've done with Hennepin County, and I would just say, for example, for the success rate or survivability of witnessed cardiac arrests, we have one of the highest success rates in the country with that. And that is something that we're very proud of working together on. And I think that's something that I know that there are other cities that are trying to meet that mark, and it's challenging. So there's some really good work we've done with them. I think it's a strong collaborative effort that we need to maintain.
Thank you. I don't see other questions in queue, so I'll stick myself in here. I wanted to point out to my colleagues that the fire department as well as the police are both transitioning to the new system of results Minneapolis, so they also were exempt from this year, meaning doing the 2017 results in 2018. Andrea Larson's email last week pointed us all to the results that are listed in the 2018 budget book, as well as the 2017 results report. So it is based off of 2016 data, but you gave us some good information. I wanted just to ask you to talk a little bit more about the inefficiencies of sending fire rigs on medical calls, particularly since you said that 85% of your calls are medical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right now I'll just give you maybe an example of a typical run. 911 call is received in 911 dispatch. We get dispatched in right now at the present time on a typical event. We get a Hennepin County ambulance with 2 paramedics. We get generally a pumper or an engine company, which is a $500,000 vehicle with 3 or 4 firefighters on it. We may or may not get a police escort. We may not get police assistance, depending on the type, auto accident type of thing. We would also have law enforcement on scene. So you've got a paramedic rig with 2 paramedics. You've got a fire truck expensive fire truck with 3 firefighters on it, possibly police officers. And many of these events may be a sprained ankle. So we get there and we go, sprained ankle. Now we've got resources that are out of service, basically. I've only got 19 stations, and we're over 40,000 events just in EMS this year, right around 40,000 EMS events. And when we get that far, now what happens is now those resources, especially our fire trucks, for example, when they go to these events, they're out of service. And so we have so many of these EMS events, now suddenly we've got people responding and filling in for those or substituting, and our map just starts to go like this. we got rigs out of position, and I think it's really important for us to look at this because I really want our firefighters, we're always going to be firefighting. Firefighting's always going to come first. And what happens is we start getting ourselves really thinned out. We may have 70, 80, 90 events going on at one time, and a lot of these rigs are out of position. Now suddenly we get a fire run. And now we've got crews coming from all over, and now it's going to impact our response time. So I think it's important to, firefighters are still going to have to go on ALS or advanced life support events. They are, with the fire trucks, they are. And so are Hennepin County paramedics. I think those lesser runs that don't require that kind of response, those are what we are going to focus on. I think that's where we can save in our efficiencies. You know, these fire rigs, they get 0 miles a gallon. I've said it many times. They are expensive to run. They are extremely expensive to fix, and they're extremely expensive to buy. So I think if we can get into a less expensive vehicle, much more efficient vehicle, maybe 2 firefighters in that vehicle, depending on how this position is going to be ultimately defined, and we triage some of those calls that come in, we can minimize that. There will certainly be a savings in that alone for sure that we can really be able to identify through this data project that we're going to enter into.
Thank you. I have a couple of other questions, but I want to pause and allow my colleagues. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, let me say, being the victim of a fire, whether there's loss of life, animal, property, valuables, is the worst thing you could ever go through. I've had 3 fires in my ward in 20 years, which is not a lot, but the effect on people is horrible. And that's why we believe that we should have a top-notch fire department. But the truth of the matter is some suburbs in Hennepin County don't even have a fire department. So I guess my question is, and I'm extremely cautious today after what happened to me with the latest comment where I criticized Hennepin County for not doing their fair share on the encampment and got an earful on all ends. Who responds in Golden Valley, as an example, to EMS calls? Wouldn't that be Hennepin County? Paramedics? Or us through mutual aid?
Committee Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Goodman, yes, you know, Golden Valley does respond as first responders, and that is in Hennepin County. So Hennepin County, under Ordinance 9, will be required to respond to that area. And
then does Golden Valley reimburse Hennepin County for the paramedic response?
That I don't know.
So I wonder what happens in these small suburbs that don't have the ability to have their own fire department. We respond through mutual aid. I believe we get reimbursed for mutual aid, correct? When we go to an event in a suburb that needs help, we probably get some level of reimbursement for that.
Yeah, it depends how it's been structured and length of time. That's correct.
But I would wonder out loud, and I'm interested if someone in the fire department could respond back to me as to what happens in all of the other small towns in Hennepin County that don't have fire departments but get emergency response through paramedics. Is the county just covering the cost of that for all those small cities, but yet we're covering the cost in Minneapolis? I'm just wondering how that equals out in the end. We don't get reimbursed for our EMS calls, but I doubt cities are reimbursing Hennepin County in the small cities either.
I do know that most of the communities, at least I know of all the fire chiefs I know of in the county, most of the communities all have a fire department. Now, it may be a small career department, say St. Louis Park, Richfield, Edina. Some of those Golden Valley is a small career department, and then they're supported by a group of volunteer members of that department also. So it's a different kind of model than we have. We all basically, we respond, all of us respond to our communities for free. That is how it works. I mean, that is how it has been. And so this model will allow us to define a model where we're going to realize some savings in our overall cost of providing that service. And also there will be, for example, in the community EMT in the legislation that's already passed, there's already a built-in reimbursement structure that's been defined and built into that. So we will get reimbursed for some of the level of work that we're going to do in this program. So there will be some reimbursement of that. And that'll be done by healthcare providers who will be reimbursing the city or us, the fire department, for that work. So there will be a model to do that. It is, you know, I talk to those outside chiefs a lot, and we are all in this together trying to figure out how we can come up with a program that is going to be effective and it's going to be sustainable and not be a burden. And that's what I think we've come up with here. I really think that we're going to see, that's what we're doing the study. And we'll be very, very focused on hours of operation of this. We're going to be very focused to see how this is going to work, pull all that data out of it. Because if we find that it doesn't work, well, then we need to relook at it. We need to look at it solidly. But I do think, I am convinced that there's no doubt that we are going to realize some savings for at least for this department with this as we start to evolve through this program.
Madam Chair, Mr. Chief, this has been an ongoing issue the 20 years I've been here.
Yeah.
So if you look at the fire department's annual report, which I look at every year because they give it to me in paper form, I guess everyone gets it in paper form, you just see the numbers increasing. Each year, EMS calls, the number of fires decreasing. Yay for us, that's because there's good fire prevention and some good and some less than good state laws about fire prevention. But the long and short of it is we are increasing our EMS calls. Firefighters have become glorified EMS responders, and it's an extremely expensive business for us to be in. Perhaps we need to be more aggressive in how we solve this problem. Others before us have, you and I mean, Councilmember Ostro was active in this. There have been lots of council members who have tried to solve this problem. The time seems right now. So I support your efforts. I would urge other council members who are interested in this issue to dig in, because this is a place of real potential reform that would be positive for firefighters. They don't love going to EMS calls either, quite frankly, and it would save the taxpayers in Minneapolis some money that could go towards other more prevention type things or other activities. I would love to see this problem resolved without blaming anyone else, but asking the healthcare system to do more, or the county to do more, so that our firefighters are not EMS responders as their main job anymore.
Thank you.
Committee Chair Palmasoff, I may add one more thing. I was going to save some of this for the Public Safety Committee meeting, but I think I need to talk about a little bit right now. That's our EMS Academy. One step to answer a little bit maybe to the question that Committee Member Goodman brought up was, hopefully in my, what I want to see happen here is we've had this EMS Academy now, we've had it for 3 years. We start out, we've got 21 of those graduates on our department. And look at tying this back to results a little bit. We had some challenges years ago that we were trying to deal with. And those members on our department now, they're about 80% persons of color, which I think is outstanding. We've come a long ways with that. But when you look at our EMS Academy, it would be my hope that at some point we would create maybe some other division within this department that will be doing and really connecting the dots on our EMS Academy graduates can start coming in and do some of these visits that we've already know are going to probably happen, or take on some of this work. It'd be different than having our firefighters. That's the issues that we'll have to certainly work through with our union, through labor management. I think they're willing to certainly sit down and talk about it, but it's all part of the process of really change. And I really want to be, I want everybody to know that I am committed to this. I'm passionate to this. I think we can have some real savings. It's the first time in my career in a long time that we're at a change in the fire service, which is, it's unique, it's challenging. I think it's going to be effective. And you all know that the fire service is 100 years of tradition unimpeded by progress. So it's certainly challenging.
Thank you. Councilmember Cunningham is next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to first take a moment to say how much I appreciate you, Chief. I feel like you have produced really great programs and systems, really thinking comprehensively about connecting the dots and a lot very strategically in a way that we don't always see leaders. And so I just want to say thank you for that, because you're very detail oriented about how do we all fit this together? How do we get more folks of color into the department? How do we get more community folks into the department? There was some conversation about reimbursement. I was curious if you could talk actually a little bit more about the revenue streams into the program, because that was something that we had previously talked about around like insurance reimbursements, as well as other potential revenue streams so that it could eventually potentially become budget neutral. And so I'm curious as to what those revenue streams might look like and what we could probably expect.
Chairman Palmisano, Committee Member Cunningham, how this is, at least right now, the discussions that we're having at the community EMT piece of that, it's kind of multifaceted. Community EMT, there is a structured reimbursement rate that is based on quarter hour, without really getting into the weeds on this. Every quarter hour, they'll be reimbursed X number of dollars. So those will be for a community EMT visit, will be visiting a patient who has a qualifying condition. Once they are discharged, say for example, Hennepin County Hospital, and they go to their North Minneapolis home and they have a qualifying condition, generally that's going to be decided upon by their treating physician, and then we will be charged with visiting them, not necessarily firefighters, but certainly somebody will be visiting them, and we'll get paid, reimbursed for that visit time. And this is where I think in terms of system-wide savings comes into play. These visits are helping really to continue to connect those dots so we can clearly identify any additional needs or assistance they need and try to keep them from making that 911 call, to try to minimize them from using the system once again. We have an expensive ambulance right back to ER, and try to break that chain of events that just a continuum. So that is one piece. On this other piece in this data study, we want to do is maybe some basic life support responses where we don't necessarily have to send that expensive fire truck, ambulance, 2 paramedics. We can send a lesser vehicle to respond on those runs. And then we'll be talking about revenue share back to us from the county and those kinds of things as we go forward with this. So there will be a reimbursement piece. Where I know we're going to save money is our apparatus. We have, a transmission in our apparatus costs $16,000 just to put a transmission in a fire truck, or maybe more. So we look at the fuel savings and fuel and maintenance and labor costs of 3 or 4 firefighters going on a sprained ankle. We could send somebody else on a lesser vehicle. That is going to have some savings. So it's all that data that I think it's important for us to pull out so I can come up here and say, here is the savings. It's one thing to talk about it. I need to demonstrate it, and that's what I'm committed to do.
Great, thank you. I'm curious, has there been any conversation with the health department, because they've started some epidemiological surveillance at the population level, and so I was curious if there's been any sort of conversations between the 2 departments about being able to share data or anything, potential partnership there.
As yet, we have not shared that because it really hasn't been clearly defined. We know what we're going to do. We're going to have to figure out all these data points we want to look at. And I think if there's some connectivity there, I think we need to talk about that. One thing that I want to be very clear on is the health department, the work they do, they're just one of the layers, and they're part of the care team. And that's what we look at, the care team. And if we can go in and make an assessment of a patient, say you need to talk to somebody from health, they'll get you connected. That's what we need to do. And so that's what this is going to be about. So it's very broad. I tell you what, a lot of fire departments in this country looking at this going, what are we going to do? Because we're not the only ones facing the same issue. We're running EMS and no reimbursement back. And so it's something I think we need to look at. And I think it's good. Hope it'll be effective. I think it will.
Thank you. I don't see any other comments or questions in queue, but before you go on to your next slide, I just wanted, in this vein, to ask you to talk a little bit about overtime costs. I know you've been working hard to curb them, and I think it's important to kind of put that story in here as we have this bigger discussion. Could you share a little bit about some of your work to curb overtime costs in your department?
We have been, Chairman Palmisano, overtime has certainly been very challenging this year for us. We have, to date, I think we have retired, I believe we've had 24 retired to date. As of this morning, I believe the number is 24. We expect to lose 30 firefighters before the end, up to a total of 30. Right now, I have 17 firefighters that are off in different forms of paid parental leave, long-term injury, and or illness. So when you start doing the math, you add up that 24 plus a 17, now we're looking at 41 positions that I don't have to be able to use. So this year, and also I'll have to say that we are probably going to have to cover over 300 shifts of military leave this year, and the backfill cost of that is all overtime. So when you look at the challenges that we have, it is really, really challenging for us. I would hope that it's always been my goal to try to eliminate or absolutely minimize overtime in this department. I think if we were in really good shape, and all of a sudden the hard assumptions that we've had to make in terms of overtime is our attrition rate. You never really know what happens, and so in the past, like I've said in the past, we've hired these big classes, and that attrition bubble comes down the pipeline, and all of a sudden now you got this huge class leaving, and now suddenly we can't react quick enough and aren't able to hire enough to be, because it takes so long to train them. So we've gone to hiring smaller classes, we've really taken a real solid look at our budget to know just what we can afford to do, and to having that flexibility to go over the top a little bit. It's allowing us to curb by our overtime, but it is challenging. I think that I would hope that if we really start to realize what potentially some of these studies in this work can do in the EMS side of things can really help us offset some of those costs that we're having over time. I think everything that we've generated some revenue back to the city, trying to assist with some of that, but it is extremely challenging. And overtime is all about bodies. It is all about personnel. We're going to continue to hire. That's why I hired this morning, because I know if I didn't hire this morning and try to correct this problem when I start the first year, we should be right at our authorized strength. If the mayor's budget is approved, we should be right at authorized strength, and hopefully then I can just about start the year with very little to no overtime and start where we need to be. This year, we started and all of a sudden we were 17 down before I knew it, and all of a sudden we try to hire a class and the meter runs. And then when all of we have done a great job of hiring a lot of veterans. We have a lot of good young veterans on this department. I certainly thank them for all their service. A lot of them are still active members in the reserves, and they have a lot of training they go to, and that drives right into our overtime budget, and because we have to backfill for them. So there's just a lot of challenges I'm going to continue to work on, and try to be creative as I can be to try to minimize some of that if I can, the impact of that.
Thank you. I also know you've done a lot with diversity and hiring, and that you're very proud of that story. But I should probably let you continue on.
Can I comment on that?
You may, yeah.
I would love to, because I think that's, a few years ago working with past council members, we had the rule of three that has been eliminated, which really freed us up and to be able to have a much more flexible in the type of class we hired. We eliminated the written exam, that I don't have a written exam anymore to come on our department. I don't think that there's a written exam that can clearly identify who's going to make a real good firefighter. I just don't. I don't think that question's been written. So this time we basically took their application, looked at their life experiences and what they've done in their life, and gave them credit for that. And the diversity of our hiring list right now is just a little under 50% persons of color. Of course, with the advent of our EMS Academy, that has just been, we've really worked hard to address some of the equity issues that we have in our department. We're very proud of what we've done. I'm very proud of the work my staff has done in regard to that. It has been a lot of work in collaboration, partnership with HR and others. So it's been something that we're very proud of, and hopefully we can equity and especially when it comes to employment, it's easy to talk about, and it's you can set some lofty goals. It's challenging to sustain, and you can't do it alone. So we appreciate all the help we've had.
Thank you. I don't see any questions at this moment, so go ahead and continue.
Okay, and the last piece we had was pretty easy. We only had really two this year, and that's our personal protective equipment. Obviously, the standards have changed in our personal protective gear that our firefighters wear. That ensemble includes, coats, pants, hood, boots, other items that protect them. Right now, that there is a 10-year standard that's out there that after 10 years, it can no longer be worn in structural firefighting. So when you have 400 firefighters and we have a fair amount of fires, this is a physically demanding job, and it certainly demands a lot of our equipment. So So this would be an ongoing funding for, to put us on a program that would allow us to buy, these sets it says in the presentation about $2,000 a piece. They are expensive. And so it's a way that we can get into a solid replacement plan and budget for it versus having to try to be reactionary, which is very, very challenging. I will say that we had a hazardous materials or fire involving hazardous materials on a warehouse in upper northeast Minneapolis a few years ago. It involved hazardous materials. We found a state statute that allowed us to bill back to that company. So we were able to bill back, and they reimbursed us of the cost of the turnout gear that was lost during that fire. So it's those kinds of things that we have to do to try to minimize the impact and cost. It's an expensive business to be in with fire trucks and turnout gear. It's one of the most important things that our folks wear, and I'm committed to hopefully having our folks have a quality set of turnout gear.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions from the dais, so are you through with your presentation fully, or?
This was pretty easy. I only had two things to talk. I said that's kind of little, but I look forward to Chairman Palmisano to our meeting in the Public Safety Committee meeting, where I can really get into talking about community EMT and what we're going to do with mobile integrated healthcare and expand on that a little bit and answer more questions about where I think this is going to go, because there's a lot of questions out there, and I think they deserve answers. So I'll be glad to do what I can do best to answer those.
Mm-hmm. I know that Councilmember Cano is interested in inviting anybody who might be interested in that topic to that deeper dive in that. Okay, then, if there's anyone that wants to flag something to take offline and work on together, I welcome you telling me offline or chiming in now. Absent that, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file both of the presentations this morning, both from Chief Arredondo and Chief Friedel, for the 2019 budget presentation. I will just go ahead and make that motion. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Now we will adjourn immediately on time for an hour, and we'll come back at 1 for 911 and other department conversations. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here, Chief Friedel.
Thank you. Very welcome.